This happened when I was in first grade. Based on the people involved, it had to have been. But just know I was very young but old enough to be in school. After school, I had to take the bus as we lived a bit too far from me to get dropped off and picked up each day. I would usually get dropped off by the bus on a random street near a different school, with a bunch of kids, and my grandma would be there waiting. The street couldn't be seen from that school, however, and it was basically just a random street with no real landmarks around it. There were some houses, but they were behind walls, so they couldn't see this street. It was a great place to grab someone and not be seen. One day my uncle had borrowed the car that was supposed to pick me up. I didn't know this at the time, so I was confused as to why my grandmother wasn't there. Since this was back in the day when little kids didn't have cell phones, I had no way to call her and to see what was going on. I was stuck there pacing back and forth since my uncle was late. All of the cars left except one, but I didn't pay it much attention. Even the kids that would walk home from the bus stop were gone at this point. 10 minutes later, a car pulls up. I still remember this car because for some reason it had patches of cloth on it in random places, as if the owner were trying to make a quilted car. The ugliness of the car doesn't matter. I just thought it was odd. Anyway, an older lady gets out of the car and begins walking towards me as I'm still pacing back and forth. I see her and stop, and then suddenly I heard a voice behind me asking that lady what she was doing. Without taking her eyes off me, the lady said, "Oh, my daughter called me and told me my granddaughter was pacing back and forth on this street, and for me to come and pick her up." By the time the voice from behind me was next to me, I saw it was one of my mum's friends. She put her arm around me and told the lady that I was the only one there and that I was with her. The crazy lady glared at us for a second before storming off to her car and driving away quickly. Turns out the car was sitting there the whole time while my friend and her mum and she were watching to make sure I was picked up. She took me over to her car and called my grandma to ask if it was okay for her to take me home. If it hadn't been for her staying around to make sure I was collected, I would have been living a very different life right now. So, to the lady with the ugly car, let's not meet again. This happened many years ago. I don't remember it myself, but my mum told me about it, and it really creeps me out. I was in either first, second, or third grade when it happened. Anyway, I was a little kid. The school has their own blocks for different grades. First to third grade are in their own block called AB block. The rest of the blocks, named C, D, and E, had their own theatre/drama studios in the basement. The AB block was in no way allowed in this studio, unless the older kids had a play going on. No adults would let us down there. With that being said, here's the story. I walked to school, and when I got there, a man I didn't know at all asked me for help in the basement. I have 2 older brothers who went to the same school, so I knew every teacher at the time, and they knew me. But I didn't know this guy. That gave me the first alert. The second alert was that he asked me for help. I was in the AB block. In other words, kids are the last people you'd ask for help. The third alert was that we were under no circumstances allowed in the basement when no play was going on. I ran to the nearest group of kids. My mum told the school, and the school did nothing about it. Nonetheless, that could have gone badly. I'm glad I was smart enough to not give him the time of day. When I was 7 years old, I was in kindergarten. My birthday is late in the year, so I couldn't apply when I was 6 like most kids, since it was through the school year. We had a teacher, Mr. H, but this isn't about him. It's about a substitute I had one day. I can't actually remember his name, as he was only there for one day. But Mr. H was amazing, very caring and good with kids. This substitute was not. He was generally very weird and quiet, and didn't talk to us much besides what was absolutely necessary, like the daily story time, etc. The issues arrived at story time. I was wearing a skirt with leggings under it. I was never feminine. Turns out I'm trans, which makes lots of sense, so I didn't cross my legs like a lady. Like my parents taught me. But hey, I was 7. So after story time, we had that free time period. Some kids painted, some just talked, some napped or ate snacks, and I was an avid reader, so I was reading as usual, sitting in the corner. The substitute was sitting there too. Nobody else was in this corner, and the substitute turns to me and says very bluntly, "Are you wearing panties? Because it doesn't look like you are." Keep in mind I didn't have my legs widespread, just not crossed, and had leggings on under my skirt. Also, for the record, I was, and at the time I was being abused at home, so I honestly didn't think much of it. That sort of stuff was normal to me at the time, but I was a little bit put off. I decided to read elsewhere, and got up to move to the other side of the classroom. The substitute teacher followed me throughout the entire block. The substitute followed me around the classroom, keeping his eye on me as I did various things like playing with the sand table, painting or reading. Every time we were doing anything complicated, like basic addition or spelling, he'd be hovering over me even though I didn't need help. He was also very touchy, constantly touching my shoulder, running his fingers through my hair amongst other things, although he never directly touched me inappropriately. But I was very uncomfortable with being touched at all due to what was happening at home. I ended up going home unscathed, and I honestly didn't even tell my parents. I didn't even realize it until years later when I was 11 and coping with the rest of my trauma, that I realized how really creepy that all was. This happened so many years ago. I was in 3rd or 4th grade in the early 1980s. I lived in a very rural area, with many small towns surrounded by woods. On this day, I was so excited to have permission from my parents to go directly home from school with a friend on her bus. Side note, my parents both worked long hours, unlike so many of my friends that had stay-at-home mums at the time. I was normally a latchkey kid, so anyway, I was going to go home with my friend on her bus for the first time. I even had a nice note from my mum about my trip home with my friend to hand to the bus driver after we got to the bus. I was super excited because my friend really lived in the woods. I had gone to her birthday party over summer, and we had collected fireflies and slept in an actual tent. This was so cool to me because I lived close to the town centre and didn't even own a tent. So here we were on her bus. We sat in the middle at first and then slowly moved up towards the front of the bus as kids got off. My friend lived just before the town line on a road that headed out of town, so hers was the final stop. Towards the end of the ride, we were right up in front behind the driver, who played some awesome tunes via the popular radio station WAAF. My friend, who was a bit of an odd little duck, was bopping to the beat of the song on the radio, while I was just looking out of the front window of the bus directly behind the driver. Just then the driver turned his head to me and said, "Hey, what would you girls do if I didn't drop you off?" I was instantly spooked and looked towards my friend, who was still bopping away to the song. "What?" I stammered. I was not used to talking to adults I didn't know, but I knew what I heard. "Oh, nothing," he replied. He was just pulling up to my friend's stop, and pulled over and let us out. I have thought about this many times over the years, wondering why he would have said that. Then I wonder, what if my friend's mum wasn't home? Would he have stopped or driven us to the middle of nowhere? Also, since this was her everyday bus, why wasn't that creep a worry for my friend? I have since gone to grow up and raise kids in the same area, but can't help but think about why that driver picked that day to get all weird. I never told any adults, as I was a kid, and after we got off the bus it was no longer a concern. But yeah, creepy bus driver, please, let's not meet again. I was around 6, and in Ireland, I would be in senior infants, I think 1st grade in America. I remember this day well, but some things are a bit blurry, as it did happen over 12 years ago. School had just finished for the day, and I was waiting for my parents to come and collect me. Both of them worked, so I was used to waiting for them. I was waiting for about 10 minutes outside the school gates, when out of nowhere this huge woman came up and grabbed me by the arm, insisting she was a friend of my mother's, and said something along the lines of, "I know where your mother is." Being a dumb kid, I followed her, and she guided me to the church directly beside the school. Her car was in the parking lot of the church. She opened the car door and threw me in. That hurt. I was confused as to why my mother's friend would hurt me, and I knew something was wrong. She didn't get in the car, but she locked the door and waited outside it, looking around as if she were waiting for someone. I thought of all the stranger danger warnings I was taught as a child. I began to cry and try to open the door, but of course nothing happened. I remember looking down at my Winnie the Pooh backpack and my eyes being blurry with tears. Next thing I heard was arguing from outside the car, and I looked to my left. There was my best friend's mother shouting at the woman to let me go and threatening to call the guards and police if she did not. I heard the woman saying that I was her daughter and she wouldn't let me go. Looking back on it at this part, I laugh, because I was a very pale white child and this woman was clearly darker skinned. I'm not sure how her argument could have made sense in her own head. After a lot of shouting, the woman unlocked the car and let me go. I assume because I was too much hassle. I was in tears and I ran away. I saw my mother and ran. My mother asked the woman what happened, and the woman flat out lied to my mother and my friend's mother, saying that she was told to pick me up from school by her friend, then got into her car and left. One of the worst parts about this is that my mother believed her, and to this day insists that this incident never happened, even though my friend and his mother remember it. So, it couldn't be a dream. I don't know what would have happened to me, or who this woman was waiting for me after she locked me in her car, but I'm very grateful for my friend's mother, as I could owe her my life.